Montana Territory, July 1879. The heat rolled off the earth in waves as Hayden Rourke stepped into the dirt-packed yard outside the saloon in Dry Creek Junction, the sun burning low behind the dusty mountains. He had not meant to stop here, just needed grain, maybe a new saddle blanket, but the sound that met him when he passed the back alley behind the saloon stopped him cold, a man's voice, slurred and mean. "She's worth at least that. Bread and whiskey. She ain't good for more." Hayden turned the corner and saw her. She was standing barefoot in the dirt, wrists tied in front of her with a fraying rope, her cheeks smudged with dust and the faintest trace of dried blood. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, but her chin was raised, her eyes locked on the man in front of her like she still had something left to protect. The man doing the talking, Gus Hanley, local trader and a known drunk, held the reins of Hayden's own horse, a strong bay gelding named Buck. Gus spat in the dirt and jerked a thumb toward the woman. "Took her off a wagon 2 days east. Folks were dead. She ain't got no one. I need the horse. You need a woman." Hayden looked at the woman again. She was maybe 20, maybe less, but her eyes were sharp. He could see past the grime and fear. There was pride in her and fury. She didn't belong tied up like livestock. She didn't belong to anyone. "Untie her," Hayden said. Gus blinked. "You ain't even gonna." Hayden pulled the reins from Gus's hand and dropped them. Buck stood still. Hayden stepped forward and untied the woman's wrists himself. Her skin was bruised under the rope, but her hands didn't shake. She looked up at him, wary. "Why?" He took a breath. "You come with me. You don't owe me anything. I'm not taking you for what he wanted." Gus scoffed. "Then what the hell are you giving me?" Hayden reached behind him, unbuckled his saddlebag and tossed it to the ground. Then he took the reins again and handed them back. "You want the horse, take him, but she comes with me." The silence that followed was thick. Gus grabbed the reins and laughed. "Fine by me. You're a damn fool, Rourke." But Hayden was already turning, his hand hovering near the woman's back, not touching, just near enough to guide. "What's your name?" She hesitated. "Fay Caldwell." "All right, Fay, I'm Hayden." "Let's go." She followed him without a word, her gait stiff, her eyes alert. He led her to his wagon tied up beside the general store, helped her up gently, then climbed beside her. He flicked the reins and started the 2-day ride back to his ranch near Flatwillow Creek. They only spoke once that day. "I had a brother," she said quietly as the sun dipped low. "He was on the wagon. He tried to fight them off. They shot him, left me tied to a wheel." Hayden looked at her. "I'm sorry." She nodded once. "So am I." They made camp under the stars, a small fire between them. Hayden handed her a wool blanket, then turned away to give her space to rest. She did not sleep much, neither did he. The next day, the miles stretched long. She did not ask questions, and he did not offer answers. But when the wheel caught on a rut and jostled the wagon, he reached out without thinking and steadied her. She held his arm a moment longer than needed. Her hand was small, but strong. By the time the ranch came into view, miles of open land, a weathered barn, a 2-room house shaded by cottonwoods, Fay was sitting straighter. She watched the land like she was memorizing it. "You got anyone else?" she asked. "No," Hayden said. "Just me. Used to be my father's place." "He passed last winter," she nodded. "It's quiet. I like quiet." He helped her down from the wagon. She stood there, staring at the house. "You sure I can stay?" "I gave up a good horse for you, Fay. I'm not sending you away." That night, she cleaned up in the washroom behind the house. When she stepped into the kitchen, he froze. Her hair was damp, braided back, and her face clean for the first time since he had seen her. The bruises were clearer now, but so was the strength in her eyes. She sat at the table across from him. "Thank you," she said. "For not looking at me like I'm something broken." He met her gaze. "You are not broken." For a moment, the silence between them felt heavier than any words. She smiled, small and tired, but real. "You gave up your horse. Best one I had." "Why?" Hayden leaned forward, his voice low. "Because no one should be sold. Not for food, not for drink, not for anything." Her hand brushed his on the table. "Not a mistake." Not an accident, neither of them moved away. That night he left the door to her room open and she did the same. They did not speak of it, but it meant something. Over the next few days, she helped with anything she could. She learned the rhythm of the ranch, where the eggs were gathered, how the stove worked, how the chickens liked to be fed early. She carried herself with quiet purpose, like she had needed a place to be useful. Hayden watched her from the fields. She was not delicate. She did not flinch at hard work. She laughed once when a hen pecked her finger, and he had not realized how much he missed the sound of laughter. One evening, after supper, she walked out to where he was tending the fence line. The sun was setting, gold over the hills. She stood beside him. "You gave up your horse, but I do not want to be something you lost." He looked at her, really looked at her. "You are not. You are something I found." Her throat moved as she swallowed. "I do not know what I am yet. You are safe," he said, "and you are wanted." Her breath caught. Slowly, she reached out and touched his chest over his shirt where his heart beat steady. "Then let me stay," she said softly. "You already are," he answered. She leaned in and he closed the distance. The kiss was not rushed. It was careful and sure, like both of them understood exactly what it meant when they pulled apart. Her forehead rested against his. "I did not think I would ever feel this again," she whispered. "Me either," he said. They stood like that until the sun disappeared. Neither of them let go, and neither of them would. The wind carried a dry hush across the grasslands as Faye knelt by the creek, sleeves rolled to her elbows, scrubbing linen against the smooth flat of a rock. The water ran cold and steady, and her hands moved without thought now, rhythm set by muscle and need. Hayden had pointed out the bend where the current stayed slow, good for wash. She hadn't asked, just nodded and gone. Behind her, cicadas hissed in the cottonwoods, the only sound beyond the water and her own breath. The bruises on her arms had faded to dull yellow, but she still caught herself flinching at sudden noises. It passed quicker each time. "You don't have to do that, you know," Hayden said, stepping down the bank with a coil of rope slung over his shoulder. Faye didn't look up. "If I'm sleeping under your roof, I'll pull my share." He crouched by the edge, watching her hands for a moment. "You always worked like this. I was raised in Kansas. Dry farm, buckwheat and beans. Mama kept us busy. I took over the house after she passed. My brother worked the fields with my pa until—" Her voice trailed off. Hayden didn't fill the silence. He picked up a stick and drew a slow line in the mud. "They teach you to rope out there?" she asked after a long pause. He glanced at the lariat on his shoulder. "My father did, started with fence posts, then calves." Then one day he nodded at a running steer and said, "Now, took me 5 tries before I caught it." She smiled faintly, dipping the cloth again. "You still miss him?" "Not in the way I thought I would, just moments. Like I'll turn to ask him something and remember he's not there." Faye wrung out the cloth and laid it flat on the rock. "I still hear my brother's voice sometimes. In the mornings, mostly. He used to hum while he stoked the stove." Hayden's gaze stayed on her. "You talk about him like he's still close." She nodded. "He is, not gone, just not here." They walked back together with the drying linens folded in a basket between them. The sun hung low now, brushing the tops of the grass with gold. Faye kept her steps steady, but her thoughts had drifted back to the wagon, to the first night alone in the dark dirt with her wrists raw and her brother's blood soaking into the wheel. Hayden stopped beside the barn and reached for the door. "You ever been around horses?" "Not much. Just the old gelding we had back home. He was half blind and mean as a bull snake." He chuckled. "You want to learn?" She looked up. "You'd teach me. I think you'd take to it." Inside the barn, the air smelled of sweat, leather, and hay. The mare in the third stall flicked her ears when they entered. "She's the calmest of the bunch," Hayden said. "Name's Junibug. You can start by brushing her down." Faye watched the horse's eyes as she stepped forward, slow and calm. She took the brush Hayden handed her and let it glide down the animal's flank. The mare huffed but didn't shift. "She's warm," Faye murmured. They all run hot when the sun's like this. She'll cool by dusk. They worked side by side until the mare's coat gleamed and the shadows outside stretched long. Faye reached to sweep a strand of hair from her face, leaving a streak of dust across her cheek. "You've got a smudge," Hayden said, reaching out. His fingers brushed her face, gentle and brief. She didn't pull away. "So do you." He let his hand drop. "Guess we're even." They stood there a moment, nothing between them but air and the soft breath of the mare. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked. "Sometimes," he said. "But I always come back to the same thought. This land doesn't ask for much, just that you stay honest with it. I don't think I'd find that elsewhere." Faye nodded, her voice quiet. "I think I'd like to stay, if you'll have me." He didn't answer right away. He stepped around the mare, stopped just in front of her. His voice didn't rise. "You've got your own mind, Faye. You don't owe me anything." "I know that, but I want to stay." Hayden held her gaze. "Then you will." She looked down, then back up. "I'm still figuring out what comes next. But I want to learn this life. I want to wake up to the sound of wind and know it means something." He reached for her hand, slow and sure. "Then we'll learn it together." She let her fingers wrap around his. For the first time since the wagon, she felt the ground beneath her feet as solid. That night they ate in the yard by lantern light, the sky smeared with stars. She leaned back in her chair, eyes closed, listening to the crickets. Hayden sipped his coffee. "You ever see the mountains? Only from a distance. They don't look real. They're real enough. Come fall, I'll take you, show you the ridge where the elk run." She opened her eyes. "You do that," he nodded. "There's a lot I'd like to show you." She didn't speak, just reached across the table and laced her fingers through his. The night held still around them. And for once, she didn't feel like she was waiting for something to go wrong. September settled in with brittle grass and cool mornings. The air carried the scent of cut hay and damp earth after the first rains. Faye stood at the edge of the garden in a borrowed coat, sleeves rolled, fingers stained from pulling up onions. She'd worked steadily through the last rows, knees sore, palms rougher than they'd ever been, and still she liked the ache of it. It meant something now. Each row cleared, each basket filled was a thing she had chosen. Hayden stepped from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "You free a minute?" She brushed hair from her brow. "What for?" "In the shed. Got something needs lifting, and I'd rather not throw out my back." She followed him past the corral, boots kicking up dust. Inside the shed, the air was thick with cedar and oil. He pointed to a wooden crate in the corner. "Took delivery from Judith Gap last week. Iron stove parts. Thought they'd sent me a single log roller, and turns out it's the whole kit." Faye crouched beside the crate and pried up the lid. Inside, blackened cast iron gleamed in the light. "You want to install it?" He nodded. "If you're planning to bake through winter, we'll need something that holds heat better than the old cooktop." She looked up at him. "You thought about that, me staying through winter?" "I have." She stood, arms crossed. "And what if I'd planned to keep on west? You haven't said a word about leaving in weeks." "I haven't said much about staying either." He leaned against the wall, quiet for a moment. "No, you haven't, but you planted turnips. That's not something people do when they're passing through." She didn't answer right away. Then, "I used to think if I stopped moving, I'd turn into a stone, like I'd get stuck in what happened." He watched her carefully. "And now I think maybe the ground here doesn't hold on so tight. Maybe things can grow again." Hayden took a step closer. "They can." She reached out and touched the edge of the crate, fingers trailing the grain. "I never got to make a home before. Not really. The place I grew up in, it was always borrowed time. Crops would fail, or a neighbor would come needing help, and everything shifted. I think I stopped believing in anything staying put." He spoke low. "That won't happen here unless you want it to." She met his eyes. "You believe in making a life with someone, Hayden. I wouldn't be standing here if I didn't." His voice carried no rush, just the calm of a man who'd already made up his mind. She stepped closer until her shoulder brushed his. "Then let's build something that doesn't break when the wind comes." They spent the next 3 days installing the stove, fitting grates and sealing joints. Faye learned the names of each piece: damper plate, firebox, ash drawer, and Hayden let her take the lead once she'd seen it done once. He only corrected her once, when she set the flue collar too tight, and even then he grinned like he was glad to be wrong. On the fourth morning, the stove held its heat through dawn. Faye stood beside it, hands wrapped around a tin cup of chicory. She leaned her hip against the counter. "I want to keep the garden going through frost," she said. "I've been thinking about building a cold frame." Hayden nodded. "We've got spare glass panes in the loft. I'll help you frame it." She smiled. "You don't think I can hammer?" "I think you'll have it built before I finish coffee." That night they sat on the porch, a wool blanket shared between them. The air smelled of wood smoke and the damp promise of a colder season. Faye leaned her head against his shoulder. "I've got my brother's Bible," she said quietly. "It was the only thing I took from the wagon. I keep it under the bed." Hayden said nothing, just let his hand rest on hers, warm and strong. "I used to read it when I couldn't sleep, not for the words, really. Just to hear his voice in my head." He turned toward her. "Would you like to read it here, out loud?" She shook her head. "Not yet, but maybe someday." He pressed his lips to her hair, slow and steady. When the lanterns burned down, they went inside together. She did not close her door that night, and neither did he. The floor creaked under their steps as they crossed the room to each other, and when she reached for him, there was no hesitation in her hands. They lay quiet for a long time after, her head tucked beneath his chin, his arm wrapped firm around her waist. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. "You don't have to be." She fell asleep with his heartbeat under her cheek and the wind brushing the windows like it was trying to find a way in. It never did. The first snow came before the ground was ready, laying a thin crust over the grassland that crackled under boots and spooked the cattle into tighter bunches near the southern fence. Faye stood at the window just past dawn, her breath fogging the glass, arms wrapped around herself as the wind rattled the panes. She'd never seen snow fall so quietly, like the sky had simply forgotten to make noise. Behind her, Hayden pulled on his coat, the collar notched high against his neck. "Fence posts'll need checking. That east slope catches wind bad." Faye turned. "I'll come." He paused at the door, one glove on, the other in his hand. "You don't have to, I know." She pulled her scarf tight and followed him out. They walked side by side toward the ridge, the cold settling in through their boots and cuffs. Hayden pointed toward a stretch of rail where the wire sagged. "Elk passed through last week. You see the tracks?" Faye studied the ground. "There, 2 calves, 1 cow," he nodded. "You're getting sharp. I watch close, always have." He crouched by the post and began tightening the wire. Faye carried the new stakes, planting them firm where the line had gone soft. When they finished, she sat on a rock at the edge of the rise, breath clouding in the air. Hayden joined her, his shoulder brushing hers as he sat. Below, the land rolled out pale and still, their house just a shape tucked into the cottonwoods. He broke the quiet. "I've been thinking about building a smokehouse." She looked over. "For meat," he nodded. "And fish, if we can get a line going come spring. You'd have to learn curing." Faye picked up a small stone and turned it in her hand. "I'd like that. I've never had a winter that felt like planning ahead." "You do now." She watched the sky for a long beat. "What was your mother like?" Hayden's jaw tightened slightly, then relaxed. "Quiet, stronger than most men I knew. She taught me to gut deer before I could tie my boots. She died when I was 16. Fever took her fast." "I always wanted to ask, but I know it's all right." "Some things just wait to be spoken." Faye nodded. "My mother used to sing while she mended. Not songs for show, just old things, low and slow. I used to think she was humming for herself, but now I think she did it to keep the silence from getting heavy. I'd like to hear one of those. Maybe I'll find one I still remember." They walked back as the sun reached higher, the snow softening underfoot. At the porch, she paused and looked out toward the barn. "I want to help with the branding next season." Hayden raised a brow. That's hard work. I didn't mean to ask, he smiled, eyes steady on hers. All right then. You'll help. Later, while Hayden rechecked the ledger in the front room, Faye sat at the table with lengths of canvas spread before her, cutting them into strips for new feed sacks. As she worked, she paused suddenly, fingers still. What is it? Hayden asked without looking up. She hesitated. I've been thinking about the girl I was before. He closed the book. What about her? She was always waiting for something bad to happen. She thought survival meant staying quiet, keeping to the corners. I don't want to be her anymore. Hayden stood and crossed the room, resting his hand gently on her shoulder. You're not. She looked up at him. I want to make this place mine, not just stay, belong. He leaned down and kissed her hair. Then you will. Her hands settled back on the canvas, steady again. His stayed on her shoulder. That night, after the chores were done and the fire banked low, they lay together in the quiet warmth of the bedroom. Faye traced a line along Hayden's chest, her voice barely above breath. I used to think I was something people left behind. He turned to her, eyes clear in the firelight. You're not. You're the reason I stay. She closed her eyes, her hand resting over his heart, and for the first time since the wagon, she didn't dream of running. The wind came down from the crazy mountains with a kind of warning in it. It wasn't winter yet, not truly, but the days burned shorter and the cattle moved slower in the mornings. Faye pulled her shawl tighter as she stepped out to the pen, feed sack slung over one shoulder. The young heifer, soft-eyed and still clumsy, waited near the gate, steam curling from her nostrils. Faye reached into the sack without hurrying. Behind her, the barn door creaked open. You always up before the sun now? Hayden asked, fastening his coat. She glanced over. I was dreaming about the yoke strap being too loose, figured I might as well check it. He leaned against the gate. You worry in your sleep, sometimes. She paused to pour the grain, but not the same way I used to. Now it's more about whether the roof will hold or if the hens'll stop laying by first frost. He watched her hands. That's a different kind of worry. Better kind. Hayden nodded. There's a stock auction in Lewistown next week. I was thinking we could ride in. Might be worth seeing what's being bred out of the Milk River stock. She brushed grain dust from her palms. You want to take me with you? I don't want to go without you. Her gaze lingered on his face, the set of his jaw, the way his hat brim cut a line across his eyes. Then she nodded. All right, we'll go. They left at first light 2 days later, the wagon packed light just enough for a few nights and a change of clothes. Faye wore a skirt she'd mended herself, the hem neat and even. Hayden had shaved, the scent of lye soap still faint on his collar. They didn't say much the first hour. The road opened wide and the sky was silver with early light. As they rode, Faye glanced sideways. You ever think about what it'd be like if your father were still around? Hayden kept his eyes on the trail. Sometimes. Mostly I wonder if he'd like the choices I've made. She turned to him. And do you think he would? I think he'd see what's here now and understand it was built honest. That'd be enough for him. They reached Lewistown by evening. The town was louder than Faye expected, wagons rattling, dogs barking, men shouting from storefronts. She kept close as they passed the livery and found a room above the dry goods store. The proprietor, Mrs. Elwell, gave a nod when Hayden paid for a second cot. Storms blowing in from the south, she said. You might want to stay through Sunday. They settled in that night with the window cracked and the wind brushing through. Faye lay awake a while, listening to the sounds of the street. Hayden sat in the chair near the stove, boots off, reading the latest cattle ledger. She spoke softly. You ever think about what it means, being with someone like this? He set the paper down. What do you mean? I mean not just sharing a roof or a meal. I mean being tied to someone. Not by accident, not by need, by choice. He stood across the floor and crouched beside the cot. That's exactly what I think about every day. She touched his face, fingers brushing the line of his jaw. You think we could make it last? I don't have a single doubt. She leaned forward, kissed him slow and sure. When they pulled apart, her voice barely carried. "Then let's stop talking about tomorrow like it's not ours yet." He nodded once. "All right." The auction was held under canvas. Hayden examined the cattle with a sharp eye, and Faye kept a notebook, marking down weights, breed lines, and temperament. She asked questions, direct ones, and the breeders answered her without condescension. By the third pen, one of them tipped his hat to her. "You handle stock, starting to," she said. Hayden smiled at that but said nothing. By the second day, they'd purchased a young bull with strong shoulders and an even gait. Faye oversaw the loading herself, speaking quiet to the driver. When they passed the mercantile on the way back, she stopped short. In the window sat a bolt of thick wool, deep blue, near black in the right light. She stared at it, silent. Hayden followed her gaze. "You want it?" "I was thinking of making a coat." "Something to last." He went inside and paid for it without a word. That night she laid the fabric across the cot and ran her hand over it. "You do things without asking. You looked like you'd already decided." She folded the wool carefully. "I used to get scolded for wanting nice things. Like wanting more meant I was ungrateful. You're allowed to want." She looked up. "You're the first man I've known who doesn't make me feel smaller than I am." He stepped closer, hands at his sides. "You're the only woman I've ever let see all of me." She swallowed once. "I want to make a home with you, not just live in your house. I want to be your equal in it. You already are." They left for home after the storm passed. The road back felt shorter, the land familiar now in its sharp, open beauty. Faye sat with her hand resting light on Hayden's knee, and he covered it with his own. The following week, they built the smokehouse together. She laid the stones herself, and he cut the frame. When it was done, they stood back and looked at it, the chimney solid and square. Faye wiped her brow. "Seems like we're good at building things." Hayden turned to her. "Let's build one more." She raised a brow. He pulled something from his coat, a simple silver ring, smooth and unadorned. "It's not fancy, but it's meant." She reached out, took it, and slid it on. "That's the only kind I want." They married the next Sunday, with Mrs. Elwell and the cattle driver as witnesses. Faye wore her new coat, the blue one she'd sewn by hand. Hayden wore his father's shirt, pressed clean. They spoke their vows without trembling. That winter was long, but it didn't feel heavy. They canned what they'd grown, smoked what they'd hunted, and read by the fire with the dog curled nearby. Faye spent the evenings sewing warm things, mittens, a second quilt, a new shirt for Hayden. He carved her a cedar box to keep her brother's Bible in, and she placed it on the mantel herself. In spring, the seedlings came up sure and green, and the new bull took to the herd without fuss. The garden spread, the fence held, and the house stayed warm. And when the first calf was born, slick and strong in the early light, Faye knelt in the straw and laughed through her tears. Hayden wrapped his arms around her and held her close. They'd built a life from the ground up. Nothing borrowed, nothing broken. Just two people who chose each other, day after day, with open hands and steady hearts, and they never stopped.